Hello everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My name is Calvin. I used to think love meant giving everything. Time, effort, money, whatever made Hallie happy. I thought that's what a good partner did. You sacrificed. You provided. You made sure the person you loved had what they wanted. It took me 3.5 years to realize something fundamental. She wasn't in love with me. She was in love with what I could provide. Hallie and I met through mutual friends at a group dinner in Atlanta. I was 28, working as a financial analyst at a mid-sized investment firm. The job was demanding but rewarding, and I'd built a stable career that paid well enough to live comfortably. Not wealthy by any means, but secure. I had savings, a decent apartment, and a reliable car. I was doing fine. Hallie was 26, working for a boutique fashion company. She had expensive taste, designer shoes, high-end brunches at trendy spots, a carefully curated Instagram aesthetic that screamed luxury lifestyle. She wasn't for money, but she'd cultivated an image that suggested otherwise. I was drawn to her confidence, the way she carried herself, how she seemed to know exactly what she wanted from life. I found it attractive. We started dating, and in the beginning, everything felt right. I'd take her to nice restaurants, surprise her with weekend trips, and buy her things I knew she'd been eyeing. It felt good to make her happy. I loved seeing her face light up when I'd present her with something she wanted. My friends noticed the dynamic pretty quickly. My closest friend would tease me about it. We'd be out at a bar, and he'd shake his head with a knowing smile and say something like, "You're raising her taste, bro. Be careful." He meant it as a joke, but there was an edge of seriousness underneath. Other friends made similar comments about how Hallie always seemed to expect me to pay for everything, about how she'd mention expensive things she wanted and I'd end up buying them, about how I seemed to be working harder to please her than she was to please me. I brushed all of it off. I told them they didn't understand our relationship, that I genuinely loved her and wanted to take care of her. That providing for someone you love wasn't a burden. It was a privilege. I believed that for a long time. After about 2 years of dating, I proposed to her. We were on vacation in Savannah, a trip I'd planned and paid for, and I asked her to marry me over dinner at a restaurant overlooking the river. She said yes immediately. She didn't waste time posting photos of the ring within minutes. The ring had cost me a lot. I'd saved for it carefully, researching diamonds and settings, wanting to get something that would impress her. When she saw it, her eyes went wide, and she told me it was perfect. We set a date 6 months out. Enough time to plan properly, but not so long that we'd lose momentum. That's when the wedding planning began. Hallie had a vision. A very specific, very expensive vision. She wanted imported flowers, not just any flowers, but specific varieties from specific regions. She wanted gold-trimmed cutlery for the reception tables. She wanted a professional drone team to capture cinematic footage of the ceremony. She'd already picked out a designer wedding dress that cost more than my monthly rent, and now she was talking about wanting a second designer dress just for the reception. I was already covering the bulk of the major expenses. The venue rental for both the ceremony and reception. Full catering for 200 guests. Accommodations for our honeymoon in the Maldives, a trip she'd been dreaming about for years. My savings account was taking a serious hit. I'd always been careful with money, always planned ahead, but the wedding costs were stretching me thin. I was still contributing to my 401k and keeping an emergency fund, but beyond that, almost everything extra was going toward the wedding. Still, I told myself it was worth it. It was our day. It should be special. Hallie deserved to have the wedding she'd always imagined. We didn't live together yet. We'd planned to move in together after the wedding. So Hallie would come over to my apartment a few evenings a week. One evening, about 6 weeks before the wedding date, she came over after work with her laptop. She settled onto my couch with a glass of wine and started showing me photos on her screen. A luxury resort in Santorini. Professional photographers. Elaborate setups with flowing fabrics and dramatic cliffside backgrounds. She wanted to do a pre-wedding photo shoot there. Fly to Greece 2 weeks before the wedding, spend 4 days shooting, and capture content that we could use for announcements and keepsakes. Then she casually mentioned that she'd found another designer dress she loved, a backup option for the reception, in case she wanted to change. I watched her scroll through the photos, talking excitedly about angles and lighting, and how incredible the pictures would be. And something in me finally reached a breaking point. I asked her how much the Santorini shoot would cost. She waved her hand dismissively and said the photographer was giving her a deal. Only $12,000 for the package. Only $12,000. I asked about the dress. She said it was around $2,000, but that it was an investment piece she could wear again. I set down my own glass and took a breath before speaking. I told her we couldn't keep stretching the budget like this, that we'd already spent more than we'd originally planned, that we needed to be realistic about what we could afford. Her expression changed immediately. The excited light in her eyes dimmed. She asked what I meant. I explained as calmly as I could. I said the wedding was already expensive, that I'd covered the venue, the catering, and the honeymoon accommodations, that adding another $12,000 to $16,000 on top of everything else wasn't feasible. She stared at me for a moment, then said the words that I should have recognized as a red flag. "It's our wedding. Don't you want it to be perfect?" I felt frustration rising, but kept my voice level. I told her I wanted our marriage to be perfect. The wedding was just a day. What mattered was what came after. The temperature in the room dropped. Hallie's face hardened. She closed her laptop slowly and set it aside. When she looked at me again, the warmth that usually softened her features was completely gone. She said she couldn't believe I was being so cheap about our wedding day, that she'd been dreaming about this since she was a little girl, that I was ruining it by being selfish with money. I tried to explain again that it wasn't about being cheap. It was about being reasonable, about starting our marriage on solid financial ground instead of buried in debt. She wasn't hearing it. She stood up, gathered her things, and left my apartment without saying goodbye. I sat there on my couch for a long time after she left, feeling unsettled but not quite sure why. I'd seen her do this before, get upset, withdraw, wait for me to chase her and apologize. It was a pattern we'd fallen into over the years. She'd get cold, I'd sense her pulling away, and I'd scramble to fix whatever I'd done wrong, usually by giving in to whatever she'd wanted in the first place. But this time, something in me didn't move to make peace. I didn't call her that night, or the next day. She didn't reach out either. By day 2, the silence between us felt heavy but not urgent. I went about my normal routine: work, gym, making dinner, and reading before bed. I thought about her, wondered if I should text, but didn't. Day 3, she posted to her Instagram story a photo of her out with friends at some upscale restaurant, laughing, looking carefree. The caption read, "Never beg for attention." I saw it. I knew it was directed at me. I didn't respond. More stories followed over the next couple of days. Her at brunch with girlfriends. Her getting her nails done. Her trying on clothes at a boutique. Each one was carefully curated to show how unbothered she was, how fine she was without me. I watched them passively but didn't react. Didn't like them, didn't comment, didn't text to ask how she was. By day 5, I could tell she was noticing my lack of response. Her stories became more frequent, more pointed. Captions like "Know your worth" and "Energy goes where it's appreciated." I still didn't engage. Then came day 7. I was home after work, sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop, reviewing some reports for a meeting the next day. My phone buzzed with a text. It was from Hallie. The message was short and direct. "Since you're comfortable denying me what I asked for, there'll be no more intimacy until further notice." I read it once, then read it again. I set my phone down and leaned back in my chair. Not angry, not panicked, just clear. Everything suddenly made sense in a way it hadn't before. Intimacy was being used as a bargaining chip. Affection had terms and conditions. Love came with a price tag, and if I wasn't willing to pay it, the relationship would be withheld. That's when I knew we weren't partners anymore. We were in a transaction. I didn't respond to the message. I just sat there thinking for a long time. Then I made a decision. The next morning, I started making phone calls. First, I called the wedding venue. I explained that I needed to cancel our booking. The woman on the other end was sympathetic but explained their cancellation policy. I'd lose my deposit, but since we were still more than 30 days out, I could get back about 40% of what I'd paid. I told her to process the cancellation. Next, I called the decorator. Canceled the floral arrangements, the table settings, all of it. Lost that deposit too, but stopped the remaining payments. I contacted the photographer. Canceled the day of coverage and the engagement photos we'd scheduled. He was disappointed but professional about it. Then the band. Canceled the reception entertainment. They kept half the deposit per our contract and refunded the rest. Each call was calm and businesslike. I didn't offer dramatic explanations. Just said the wedding wasn't happening and I needed to cancel services. The hardest call was to Hallie's parents. Her father, Robert, was a decent man. Gruff but fair. We'd had several conversations over the years, and while we weren't close, there was mutual respect. I called him that evening. Told him I needed to speak with him about something important. When he answered, I was direct. I said I wanted him to hear it from me before anyone else. I wouldn't be going forward with the wedding. There was a long pause on the other end. Then he asked why. I kept it simple. Said Hallie and I weren't right for each other. I didn't think we should get married. I didn't badmouth his daughter or go into details. Just stated the fact. Robert was quiet for another moment, then said he appreciated my calling. He asked if there was anything that could be worked out. I told him no, that my decision was final. He thanked me for being respectful enough to tell him directly and wish me well. We ended the call cordially. Then I turned to Hallie's things in my apartment. Over the course of our relationship, she'd left quite a bit here. Clothes in my closet, toiletries in my bathroom, books on my shelf, random items scattered around, a jacket draped over a chair, her favorite coffee mug in the cabinet, a pair of shoes by the door. I spent an evening gathering everything. I folded her clothes carefully, packed her toiletries in a bag, and collected every item that belonged to her. I put everything into 2 boxes, taped them closed, and set them by my front door. Waiting for the logistic company, I called to pick it up and deliver it to her. Hallie found out about the cancellations through the vendors. Her wedding planner called her, confused about why the venue had reached out about a cancellation. Then the photographer called. Then the florist. Then the band. Her phone must have exploded with confusion and questions. Then her parents called, having heard from me. I can only imagine what that conversation was like. Around 8 that evening, my phone started ringing. Hallie's name lit up the screen. I watched it ring. Didn't answer. She called again. And again. 6 times in a row. I let every call go to voicemail. The texts started coming in rapid succession. We need to talk. This is insane, call me back. You can't just cancel everything without telling me. Pick up the phone right now. I read them as they came in, but didn't respond. Finally, after the 10th text, I replied with one simple message. There's nothing left to talk about. Then I muted the conversation. The next day, I was home after work when there was a knock at my door. Sharp, insistent knocking. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Hallie stood on the other side. Her face was blotchy and red. Her eyes are swollen. She'd clearly been crying. She knocked again, harder this time. She called my name through the door. Said she knew I was home, that my car was in the parking lot. I stood there with my hand on the doorknob, watching her through the small glass circle. She knocked again, begged me to let her in so we could talk. Said we could fix this, that we just needed to communicate. I felt the old conditioning kick in. The urge to open the door, to let her in, to smooth things over and make peace. 3.5 years of patterns pulling at me to do what I'd always done. But I also knew what would happen if I opened that door. There would be tears and apologies and explanations. She'd say she didn't mean the text, that she was just upset and said something in the heat of the moment. She'd promise to be more reasonable about the wedding expenses. She'd tell me she loved me and couldn't imagine life without me. And I'd probably believe her, or want to believe her. And we'd fall right back into the same pattern, until the next time she didn't get what she wanted and the cycle started again. I made my decision. I stepped away from the door, quietly, walked back to my living room, and sat on the couch. She knocked for another few minutes, called my name. Her voice got more desperate. Then, eventually, silence. I heard her footsteps walking away, heard a car door open and close, heard an engine start. I sat on my couch in the quiet apartment and exhaled slowly. That was the hardest part, but also the most freeing. Over the following weeks, Hallie made a few more attempts to reach me. The texts became less frequent. The calls eventually stopped. I never responded to any of them. My best friend reached out to check on me. I told him I'd called off the wedding. He asked if I was okay. I told him I was better than I'd been in a long time. He said he was proud of me, that he knew it couldn't have been easy, but that I'd made the right choice. Other friends had similar reactions. Some were shocked. A few asked if I was absolutely sure. But most were supportive once they understood the situation. I threw myself into work, took on additional projects, used the energy I'd been spending on wedding planning and relationship maintenance, and redirected it into something productive. I started going to the gym consistently, 5 days a week, early mornings before work. I'd neglected my health during the relationship, always too tired or too busy with whatever Hallie wanted to do. Now I had the time and energy for it. I started cooking properly again, trying new recipes, enjoying the process of making meals just for myself. I'd gotten into the habit of eating out constantly because Hallie preferred restaurants. My kitchen had been barely used. Now it has become a space I actually enjoy. I picked up hobbies I'd let slide, started reading again, actually finishing books instead of just scrolling through my phone at night. Started hiking on weekends, exploring trails around Atlanta that I'd always meant to visit but never made time for. My social life expanded. I spent more time with friends. Started saying yes to invitations I would have turned down before because Hallie wanted to do something else. I met new people through the hiking groups and the gym. Casual friendships that didn't require constant maintenance or emotional labor. And honestly, I felt lighter than I had in years. Financially, I recovered quickly. Yes, I'd lost deposits on various wedding vendors, but I'd avoided much larger expenses. The wedding itself would have cost me thousands of dollars by the time Hallie's vision was fully realized. I'd spent a few of them before canceling everything. I still had my savings mostly intact. I still had my emergency fund. I wasn't starting from zero like I would have been if I'd gone through with the wedding and the expensive honeymoon and the financial hole we'd been digging. I felt relieved, genuinely, deeply relieved that I wouldn't be starting a marriage already buried in debt, already financially stretched beyond comfort. A few months after everything ended, I was out with my best friend at a bar. We were a few beers in, talking about nothing important, when he asked me if I ever regretted my decision. I thought about it honestly before answering. I told him no, that I didn't regret it at all. Ending the engagement was hard, but staying would have been harder. He asked if I thought I'd dodged a bullet. I said I thought I'd dodged a life of resentment, of feeling like an ATM instead of a partner, of buying peace instead of building love. My best friend nodded slowly, then raised his glass. To know when to walk away. I clinked my glass against his. To know when to walk away. I've thought a lot since then about what I learned from those 3.5 years with Hallie. I learned that love without respect isn't actually love. It's a dependency. It's a transaction. It's one person giving while the other takes. And when the giving stops, so does the affection. I learned that real partnership requires balance. Mutual respect. Both people contributing, both people compromising, both people willing to put the relationship above individual wants. I learned that when you start buying peace just to avoid conflict, you're not in love anymore. You're in debt. Emotional debt that compounds over time until you're so deep you can't remember what it felt like to be equal partners. I learned that threats and ultimatums aren't tools of love. They're tools of manipulation. And giving in to them doesn't save the relationship. It just teaches the other person that manipulation works. Hallie thought I'd beg. She thought I'd panic when she withdrew intimacy, when she went cold, when she made me choose between her demands and my boundaries. She thought I'd fold like I'd always folded before. But I didn't. Not because I stopped loving her, but because I finally understood that what we had wasn't love. It was a transaction where I kept paying and she kept taking. And the moment I couldn't pay anymore, the relationship dissolved. Real love doesn't work that way. Real love doesn't threaten to withhold affection when you set a reasonable boundary. Real love doesn't demand you stretch yourself beyond what's sustainable just to prove your commitment. Real love doesn't make you choose between financial security and approval. Walking away was the hardest thing I'd done. Watching her stand outside my door, crying, knowing I could open it and temporarily fix the pain, that took everything in me to resist. But it was also the most necessary thing I've ever done. It freed me from a pattern that would have defined the rest of my life. It saved me from a marriage built on inequality and resentment. It gave me back my self-respect. I still believe in love. I still want partnership and companionship and someone to build a life with. But now I understand what to look for. And more importantly, what to walk away from. Someone who sees your boundaries as obstacles instead of self-care isn't your partner. Someone who uses affection as currency isn't your lover. Someone who makes you choose between self-respect and their approval isn't your equal. Hallie taught me that. Not through the good times, but through that final text message and everything that followed. When you start buying peace just to avoid conflict, you're not in love anymore. You're in debt. And the only way out is to stop paying. Thank you for watching.